Hello, and welcome to GreyNoise University. I'm Brad Chiappetta, and this module is part of our GreyNoise API and CLI training series. In this module, we will be covering the IP-quick endpoints and reviewing examples. The IP-quick endpoints are used to provide a high-level check on an IP address to see if it exists in either the GreyNoise noise or riot datasets. The IP-quick endpoints have two options that return three simple fields for each IP submitted. The first is a single lookup endpoint. The second is a bulk or multi-lookup endpoint. When using the single IP-quick endpoint, the IP address is appended to the end of the API URL, which makes it easy to use. The endpoint uses a GET request. For usage monitoring, this endpoint consumes one search per IP submitted. The endpoint returns a status code of 200, meaning the request was successful, a 400, meaning there was an error in the request, such as an invalid IP address being sent to the endpoint, a 401, meaning the API key provided was not valid, or a 429 if the daily rate limit was reached. For this endpoint, the only input required is the IP address you wish to query. If we enter a sample IP address on the reference page and click the Try It button, we can review the response. Let's run this same request on a CLI by copying the curl command from the API docs and pasting it into our terminal. I'm also going to use a tool called JQ to help make the output easier to review. In the response, you can see that it includes noise, riot, and code, which help provide some basic insights into what this IP address is doing. To understand what these codes mean, you'll want to reference the API documentation for the full list and their descriptions. Now, let's take a look at the bulk lookup endpoint. This endpoint is very similar in the data that is returned on the single IP lookup endpoint, but allows for 1,000 IP addresses to be looked up in a single API request. When using the multi-IP lookup endpoint, a list of IP addresses are sent as part of the request body using the IPs key. This endpoint uses a POST request to send the request body. For usage monitoring, this endpoint consumes one search each time it is used. Similar to the single IP lookup endpoint, this endpoint will respond with the same status codes as listed previously. Let's enter a set of IP addresses into the reference page. Now let's go ahead and try this request. Let's run this same request in the CLI, just as we did last time. In the response, you can see the basic information that is included for each of the IPs provided in the endpoint. This concludes this training module. If you have any questions on the topics covered, please reach out to support@greynoise.io.